Coming up today on LinkedIn News Live. The end of the office and the big city exodus. This pandemic is shaking up everything we know about the real estate market. We're speaking with Jonathan Goldstein, CEO of global real estate investment firm Kane International, about how his team is identifying trends in uncertain times. Hello, everyone. I'm Susie Jackson, and welcome to LinkedIn News Live, where the business conversation begins with you. It's October 20th. Let's take a look at some of the top stories professionals are talking about today. Target giving another bonus to its frontline workers. The retailer will dole out perks of $200 to 35,000 workers next month. It's the fourth bonus for Target team members this year, as the retailer gears up for a busy online holiday shopping season. China's economy is brightening after a historic decline earlier this year. Consumer spending and industrial production continue to rise this quarter. Data suggests China may recover faster than most of the world, although its GDP is still sitting below economists' forecasts. And new research suggests apprenticeships may be a path to boost economic mobility. Four-year degrees are often associated with high-paying jobs, but according to a study by Opportunity America and the Brookings Institution, those who completed apprenticeship programs were earning six figures within 5 years of graduation. For more stories like these, check out the news module to the right of your LinkedIn feed, or if you're on mobile, you can click into the search box. Now we continue our coverage of this year's virtual Milken Institute Global Conference, which hosts conversations with top business leaders by bringing you some of the guests right here on LinkedIn News Live. Today, we're breaking down what's happening in real estate. The residential market is split between a house boom and an eviction wave, and the commercial market is struggling after months of shutdowns and social distancing. Joining us now is Jonathan Goldstein, who heads one of the world's leading real estate investment firms and has had to pivot and forecast what's next in this turbulent environment. Jonathan, thank you for joining us on the show today.
Hi, Susie. Thank you for having me.
I want to start by talking about offices. We are hearing people fleeing cities, people working from home, but big corporations usually have big leases. What does that mean for the timeline here? Are we going to see a big city exodus and all companies just turning and running for the hills? Or are they kind of stuck for the time being in whatever lease situations that they previously had before the pandemic?
Well, that's a very interesting place to start. And whilst I'm talking to you from my house today, I have actually been in my office for the majority of the day, as I have been most days since the pandemic. And I think you need to step back and first of all recognize, as you have done, that most of these companies have long-term commitments to offices. But secondly, I think we need to look broader than merely the impact upon the property market. We need to look about what impact this is having upon people. In other words, the narrative that we're seeing whereby people are not occupying offices and are suggesting that people should work from home for such a long, prolonged period of time is not good for anyone. It's not good for the companies whose vibrancy and energy and spirit and enthusiasm and creativity is dulled by people working from home day in, day out. And secondly, it's not good for the people. You know, it's very, very easy for CEOs living in their nice houses, maybe out in the Hamptons or maybe in Palo Alto or in the leafy suburbs in Los Angeles, to tell people who are living in smaller apartments that that's where they should get up every morning and work and sit and stare and look at the same four walls. What does it do for mentoring? What does it do for training? What does it do for the development of people? And ultimately, every business depends upon the quality of its people. So I think what we're going to see is we've seen a trend in the first 7-8 months of this pandemic whereby people have been talking about staying at home. But I think we're going to get a groundswell of people saying, hello, I need to be back in my city. I need to be back in my office. I want to see my colleagues. I want to enjoy the creativity and the spark of enthusiasm and the humanity that's created when people are together. And I think ultimately that narrative is going to win out, and it's going to win big. Because when people feel comfortable going back to their offices, people are going to be desperate to go back there. Susie, I'm sure that's the same with you. And ultimately,
I definitely feel that way right now. I love that you're talking about creativity and getting back into spaces and places where we can be more creative with each other. I'm wondering about creativity in the real estate industry. We're not at that moment yet where everyone's going to feel comfortable just going back en masse. What are some things you think the industry can be doing to push companies to think differently? I've heard satellite offices. What do you think about that, or other
I think there's a whole
solutions
combination of things, and there is no doubt that the most important thing that we have to do is to keep our environments clean and safe and make people have confidence to come back to the marketplace and back to their offices. And ultimately, the biggest issue that needs to be solved is testing. We need a much more effective testing environment so that we can identify much quicker who is and who is not a danger to your fellow employees, to encourage people back to the offices and to make people safe. Now, there's no doubt that the the pandemic has brought on much faster changes that were happening anyway, changes in technology, changes in home working balance. That's not going to change. Trends have occurred which are not going to be pushed back in their entirety. But in terms of long-term commitment to cities, long-term commitment to primary cities, to New York, to London, to Los Angeles, to Miami, we're going to see that continuing. We're going to have a hiatus. It's going to be messy. Some people are going to fail during that time. But ultimately, these cities will win out because human beings are attracted to environments where they can be entertained, where they can enjoy sports, where they can enjoy great restaurants, where they can mix with great young and other like-minded people. And ultimately, that will win out in the long term.
I want to say hi to some of the folks in the stream who are joining us now. I hope we're being entertained by your informative answers today, Jonathan. We have Robert from Florida, Quentin from Virginia. Welcome to LinkedIn News Live. Dolores from Texas, Mark from Las Vegas, and Karen from Canada. Thank you for joining us. You just mentioned a moment ago commitment to cities and confidence earlier. I want to ask a question coming at this from the lens of some of these tech companies who are at the same time saying people can work from home permanently if they choose, but then also scooping up real estate in markets like New York still. How are we supposed to interpret that in terms of confidence and commitment?
I think you have to interpret it in exactly what you see. Google is now being, rumored in spending hundreds of millions of sterling in London on their headquarter buildings. You have to believe that they believe long term they're going to need this space in the center of towns. And whilst there might be a short-term narrative that ultimately during this period they don't feel safe in bringing their people back to their offices because of the lack of testing, in my view, in the way I've just expressed, long term they know that in order to attract the right talent to their businesses, they have to provide an environment where people want to be with them, want to work with them, and want to enjoy the relationships with other people. And as I said, I don't think that's going to change. It may be going through a short-term period. This is a 1 in 100-year experience. Thankfully, we may not have to live with it again. But ultimately, human behavior has driven so many people to the cities over the years, and I believe it will continue to do so in the future.
And we've got some folks in the stream talking about that point and making others as well. Nick is saying he can't agree more with what you're saying, that he misses being in the office. Whereas Christine joining us.
Nick, where is Nick?
Nick, I'll have to ask you to add in where you're talking to us from. But in the meantime, we've got Christine also saying that she loves working from home. So we've got people on both sides. It's probably a big spectrum, as we know, as we all have different feelings about this. Chris is saying the pendulum will swing the other way at some point and cities will thrive again. So a vote of confidence there from Chris. And Matthew says, I believe the rebound from this delay in retail and events will have a ferocious appetite. So similar to what you're saying there, people are so hungry to get out and interact. And I want to use that moment to talk about retail a little bit. This has been a death knell for malls. We're also seeing closures on Main Street, storefronts standing empty. What happens to all this space?
Well, I think that what the pandemic has done is it has accelerated the trend towards online shopping and probably done 5 years growth in 6 months. And again, that's not going back. We're not pushing that back. So I think that those secondary and tertiary malls and the strip joints that you see around America, I don't think they're coming back. And I think ultimately those areas are going to need to be repurposed, maybe into more low-cost housing, which is a great thing because we've got an obligation in society to ensure that people have got places to live, or other alternative uses. But I think the main shopping centers will continue, those great centers that have experiences that people enjoy. But I think you're going to find that falling off the edges are going to be an awful lot of real estate, which needs to be repurposed into secondary and other uses, because they're not going back to retail. That retail world, I believe, will probably be dead forever.
Let's talk about more of that residential idea. You said flipping those retail spaces into residential units. In the residential space right now, we see both a mass of evictions, but juxtaposed with this massive movement towards work from home. How do we get some of those spaces to flip? Is there a public-private partnership involved? What's standing in the way?
Well, ultimately, the first thing that's standing in the way is the unrealistic expectations of the sellers as to the values of their own properties. But ultimately, I believe that process will be accelerated. We've lived through a period where banks have shown great forbearance towards their borrowers. As a result, there's been very little foreclosure going through the system. When that changes, you will find an awful lot of real estate coming onto the market at much more affordable rates. And when it does, I think you'll find that people will come in with new ideas about how to work this space, may well be warehousing, distribution centers, and also, I believe, an awful lot of affordable housing in areas which currently are in dire need of more housing for people.
That is a really creative solution. I'm wondering, what's the kind of the mental component with convincing a community that what was formerly a strip mall is now a space that's primed to call your home?
Well, the planning laws around the world have never been set up to help people. That's a sure thing. In other words, the NIMBYs, the not in my backyard moment, the thought process that we love ideas about, developing and in creating housing, but not near where I live. But I think ultimately it's going to require a partnership between commerce and the authorities to ensure that happens, a liberalization of rules around the world to ensure that happens. If that happens, if governments are far-sighted enough to understand this as an opportunity to take the moment and move on and accept that structural change to real estate is needed, I think you'll find great opportunities around the world.
And we've got Bradley in the stream echoing that. He says malls could be redeveloped into live, work, play campuses for big tech companies. What do you think about that? Does big tech need more help finding real estate?
Well, I think what we've seen over the last 10, 15 years is that big tech has been a great consumer of real estate. If you look around the major cities, be it New York or London, in the years prior to the pandemic, it was the Googles and likes of this world who were the Amazon and Salesforce and all, many companies like that were great consumers of real estate. So the more opportunities we can give these companies to grow and to create environments in which their people wish to work, live and play, I'm sure they'll be very, very receptive to that.
We've got another question in the stream coming from Nancy, who wants to know if you suggest buying a home now or waiting for mid next year.
I never like to make predictions for individuals. I don't have a crystal ball. Okay. If I had a crystal ball, I'd be really, really successful. What I've always believed on my own account, in other words, for me as a human being, not me as a businessman, is that when I'm ready to step on that ladder, ready to step on that housing ladder, and if I feel the market and what I'm being offered is a sensible offering, then I'm happy to act. I can't predict the future. No one knows what the market's going to look like this time next year. But obviously this year has been in certain areas a bit weaker. So it may well be now is a good time to act. But I would most importantly not enter into commitment whereby you didn't feel comfortable with your obligation to service most probably a mortgage over the course of the next 2-3 years. If you feel comfortable with that, now is a great time. And let's not forget, mortgage rates, borrowing rates are at all-time lows. When I entered the real estate market as an owner in the late 80s, when I just before I got married, mortgage rates in London were 6-7%. Today, I could borrow 10-year money at 1.5%, just like I can in the US. So if you feel you've got a long-term commitment from a mortgage borrower, from a mortgage provider, now is probably a great time, but make sure that you don't put yourself under cash pressure.
So it's that short-term, long-term. Again, don't just respond to the short-term panic, but think about, does it make sense for you in the long term? So probably the
Correct.
same wisdom is whatever the world is doing, whatever the markets are doing.
You have to feel comfortable. You don't need to put yourself under stress. No one needs to go to bed every night worrying about how they're going to make ends meet. So you must make sure that on an individual basis that you've entered into a commitment that is serviceable.
Yeah, I think everyone probably has enough to worry about as they go to bed in 2020 every night as it
At
is.
this moment in time, it's not been the greatest of year for most.
No, I agree. I know you don't have a crystal ball, but I do want to talk about hotels for a moment. If you did have that ball to look into, not a prediction, but just what's your sense? You know, travel is down. It's probably not coming back any sooner than we're getting back into an office. And even then, business travel is a question mark. What kind of hotel properties do you think are going to make it? And for those that don't, back to that question of retail space being available, what happens to those kind of buildings who are similarly not zoned right now to be homes or anything but what they are?
Look, Susie, it's a great question, right? We own the Waldorf Astoria in Beverly Hills. So we're seeing it on a real-time basis. And obviously the lack of tourism and the lack of business travel has hurt us. Having said that, what I think you're going to see in most markets, but in particular in the hotel market, is a flight to quality. So the best hotels are going to get back to occupancy or acceptable occupancy levels much faster than secondary and tertiary hotels. We're seeing that in Beverly Hills already. So I think what you're going to see is you're going to see a lot of secondary and tertiary hotels fail, and you're going to see them fail fast. You're going to see them fail by the end of 2021. When this forbearance period that I've already referred to runs out, you're going to see these hotels fail. But you're going to see the great hotels of our world thrive and stay solid, not trade like they did in 2019, but it's going to take time till 2022 to them to get back to some level of normality. So the most important things for those great hotels, the top of the class hotels, is that they have a cash profile, not dissimilar to buying your own house, to ensure that you have enough cash in your system to see you through this period until you get back to some levels of travel. Now, of course, business travel is going to be affected for some period of time. But at some point in time, I can tell you, I've been in London now for 7 months. I'm desperate to get back on an airplane, go and see my colleagues, go and see my friends in the USA when you decide to let me back in again. It is going to start. I do think business travel is going to be down for some time. Tourism will recommence at that point in time. I think the hotels at the top of their market will again be successful.
So we'll see some of the big hotels, some of maybe the more higher luxury chains making it, but some of those others are just going to drop off and fall by the wayside from what your guess is.
I think that's right. It's unfortunate, but I'm afraid that's right.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big change. All of this is a really big change to be happening all at once, all from go when we weren't expecting it. It's a time for everyone to be able to reinvent and really start from scratch again about how they're thinking about solving problems. I'm curious about how this moment is for the real estate industry in terms of getting in new ideas, maybe getting in more diverse backgrounds of people to solve some of these problems. Is this a moment to reset and try to rethink the way you're approaching
100%,
some of these big
100%.
start and go?
It's 100% right. You have to get out of the groupthink basis. You have to have different people thinking about ideas. You have to be able to reach through all your talent, all the people you know, to try and find the right ways to ensure that you come strongest out of this pandemic. Now, look, we have set, in my own business, we sat down earlier in the year and we planned through the back end of 2020, first quarter of 21 as much as we could. Sitting here now in October 2020, we're thinking about this period prolonging through the middle of 2021. This is going to go on for much longer than any of us initially expected. So the ability to think creatively, the ability to bring ideas to the table that you didn't previously think of or which were not part of your previous thought process is hugely important. And if we all look the same and we all sound the same, you're not going to get that diversity of idea. And one of the areas in which the real estate industry has really let itself down, I believe, generationally for years, has been this lack of diversity, the lack of people of color, the lack of women, the lack of people with different thought processes, just a complete diverse background. And within my own business, we've started this some time ago, is a real pursuit of that diversity, pursuit of that different thought process. Because I think if you have that different thought process, you have a much higher probability of success.
So you and your firm are being very intentional about it. What do you suggest that other firms or other folks in this industry do to be more intentional?
Well, I think you have to start at the bottom. You have to say that you want to be attracting talent from all types of society. We should be promoting college kids. We should be promoting graduates, but all the way through the system, we need to be thinking about is that person going to think like me, but is that person going to bring something new to the subject? Is that person going to bring a change of thought, a line of thought that I may not have thought of myself? Now, that may be by nationality. My business is full of Europeans in London. Okay, I've got Italians, I've got Poles, I've got Germans, I've got Austrians, I've got Irish, I've got English, et cetera, et cetera. And it's that diversity of thought that brings a new approach to the marketplace and gives us a real opportunity of succeeding.
Well, and new approaches and new ways to succeed are certainly high demand right now. Jonathan, I want to thank you so much for joining us today on LinkedIn.
It's a pleasure, Susie.
Live.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. That was Jonathan Goldstein, CEO of Kane International. Tomorrow, we will continue our Milken coverage. My colleague, Devin Banerjee, will sit down with David Hunt. He's the CEO of $1.4 trillion investment firm PGIM to discuss what a reformed capitalism looks like. I'm Susie Jackson. Thanks again for watching LinkedIn News Live.